Hello, everyone. This is Brandon Easton. I'm a writer, comic book creator, and former New York City public school teacher who has worked in and around the entertainment industry for the better part of the last 20 to 25 years. I wanted to talk today really quickly about a term you hear a lot, which are politics. And I'm not talking about, Republican or Democrat or anything like that. I'm talking about industry politics. We hear that term a lot. We hear a lot of vagueness around the term. We very rarely get real world examples of what that means, what it feels like, what it sounds like, how people perpetuate and interact with the politics behind the scene. So I'll give you kind of an illustration of how that operates, particularly from the perspective of a black writer, specifically in the comic book business. Well, I'm not going to mention names, I'm not going to call out anybody or anything like that, but I am going to talk about my experiences when I was trying to break in the late 1990s up until, the mid to early 2000s. So I would say like 1998 to about 2005. I did have some successes around 2002, but there was a lot of wild stuff on either side of that, and I will get into that right now, real quick, right now. First things first, there were not a lot of black writers that were prominent and in your face during the 1980s or the 1990s. When I was coming up, Wizard magazine, if you remember, it was a kind of a major force within the comic book business at one point, particularly on the editorial side, in the sense that writers that were heavily featured in Wizard magazine became the names that many of us still know today. The names who constantly got work at Marvel and DC, right? I'm not hating on them. I'm not saying anything negative about any of that. It's just how it went. But Wizard magazine was in a lot of ways responsible for a lot of the attention, specifically a lot of white male comic book writers was getting during that time. Okay? Very rarely, if ever, did I see anything about black creators or major projects that black creators got on in the pages of Wizard magazine. Now, mind you, Milestone was still around as we were moving toward the late 90s, but strangely enough, they weren't getting a lot of coverage in a lot of places outside of really black media spaces. So if you were a black writer trying to break in, you were growing up with these books, you really wanted to work on some of these books. The only names you really had were, Dwayne McDuffie, God rest his soul, and Christopher Priest, who went by another name, but before that, but that has nothing to do with the story. So you had Dwayne McDuffie and Christopher Priest, and really that was it. There may have been a few folks, there were a few folks scattered in the indie space, especially in the self publishing space. There were some black creators, but they weren't getting the love and attention that they deserved, in my opinion, and in the opinion of many others. Now, when you were trying to break in as a writer, regardless of your background back then, there were only really one or two ways to break in. One, which was extremely rare, which is you had to wait until some company decided to do a submission, an open submission phase where you would just randomly submit scripts and hope for the best, right? Companies didn't do that a whole lot. It happened every now and then, but not very often. Now, the other way to break in was to pair up with an artist, maybe do 5 pages of a story that featured their characters. You had to go through a process of doing agreements and things like that because there are legal considerations at play. But at the end of the day, you would need an artist to pair with you, and an editor would need to see the potential in not only the artwork but also in your storytelling as a writer. And there are occasions when that did happen for people, mainly white guys, and I'll get into that in a second. But the third way to get in is if you were friends with an editor or a publisher or something like that, and they needed like somebody to hurry up and drop a plot or a script because something bad happened somewhere else, and then you would slot in, and that's how you could get work that way. Those were the ways to break in as a writer back in like the late 1900s and 1900s, like in the late 90s and early 2000s, for the most part, right? Other than creating your own stuff or becoming a TV writer or a movie writer and moving, that way. Now, if you were going to go that traditional route of finding an artist to pair up with so you could submit to editors, this is where things get weird. This is where the politics start. A lot of times, I'll say I tried to pair up with black art talent. And a lot of times their reaction and interaction with me was very cold, dismissive, and kind of like, get away from me, kid. You know, I don't have time for this. Part of it was, I believe, the fact that they knew, I didn't know this at the time, but I believe they knew very well that they could not approach an editor at Marvel or DC with a black writer in tow because that would be an automatic rejection. I'm not saying that there was racism behind those editorial decisions. I mean, we could say that. But the reality was, whatever the reasons were, whether it was untested market compatibility or fear that people wouldn't buy it once they knew somebody was black, or just good old fashioned bigotry, whatever those reasons were, you could not get in that way if you were a black writer. As the years moved on, we're starting to get to 2010, 2011, 2012. Many of us were starting to drop our own material, you know, and because of that, you did see an editorial regime change where some people were a lot more open to a black writer than the previous generations of editors were. In some cases, some of those editorial regimes are still firmly in place at the larger companies, and some of these editorial regimes will not hire or do not hire black creative talent on a writing side. There are reasons for that, which I illustrated in some of my earlier videos where I talk about the lack of sales when black writers get on major titles contribute to the lack of hiring down the line. But whatever the case may be, there are politics at play that suggest if you are a black writer, and it is known by the audience that you are a black writer, people will not support you even if you get critical acclaim, even if you get a lot of positive attention. Another thing that happens, and this is the more extremely dark side that we don't really like to talk about, but there are black people within the business who do work against other black folk, but you don't know that. There are people who are very pro-black facing who behind closed doors will stop you from getting opportunities. I am not happy to talk about this, but it's something that needs to get out there. Because if you are wondering why sometimes it seems like there are obstacles at play, that there are things stopping the overall forward momentum of black creative talent in comics, it's because there are a couple people here and there who feel like they should be the person, the only one. I call it the Highlander mentality. Like there can be only one. So a lot of folks will jump on a black bandwagon and talk about blackity black and we're pro black and blacks this and blacks that. But the minute you're out of earshot, the minute that they're behind a closed door with a gatekeeper, they're going to position themselves as the person, as the only person that should be hired for all black projects or any black projects. And I get it because people want those four-figure checks. I guess it's enough to stab people in the back for. But that's what happens a lot of times. And you have to be very, very careful who you trust in this business. Because, like in all businesses, like in all creative professions, there's a lot of self interest. Obviously, you need to have an ego to do this. Obviously, you need to have the ability and the ambition to take the slings and arrows and keep moving forward. No one's going to knock anybody's hustle. But I believe that I don't need to lie on somebody. I don't need to break down somebody else in order for me to win. I prefer an open gladiatorial field of creative talent and without the politics and see who wins in the end. If somebody's script is better than mine, so be it. I'm happy with that because I want the best person to get the gig, and I want whatever gig they get to help them move forward. Because there is a phrase, a rising tide lifts all boats. Not everybody sees it that way. Some people are whirlpools, but by pretending to be a rising tide. They know who they are, they know what they do, and they have to, at the end of the night, look at themselves in the mirror. I feel that if you're as good as you say, if you're as intelligent as you say you are, you don't have to hurt and belittle and demean other black creative talent in order to move forward. So sometimes if you're all wondering why things seem weird, why there's so much gossip, why there's weird obstacles in the way, sometimes those obstacles are placed in the path by other black people. You're just not aware of it. So keep that in mind as you traverse this industry. A lot of people, and I tell some of my close colleagues this all the time, a lot of people will pat you on the back, smile in your face, you know, do all this, black pro black gesturing, all this performative stuff, but really they are snakes in the grass. They are worms. They are spineless. They are pulling a rug from beneath your feet while wearing a stealth suit, like the Predator. Think about it. In any case, keep working hard, folks. Keep doing what you got to do, but be very careful. Keep your eyes open. I'm not a cynic. I'm a pragmatist with optimistic leanings, right? I've had enough stuff happen to me. I've had enough people stab me in the back. I've had enough people lie. I've had enough people attempt to blackball me, put me on a blacklist. I've had all that happen and I'm still here. I'm still here and I'm still working. You can't always stop people even when you try. Because at the end of the day, I do believe karma exists. Take care, people.